Okay, so thank you very much for coming on.
Sure.
I do appreciate it. I've followed you a little bit over time. I'm a little younger than you. You were sort of a rock star when I was younger. We heard about you, but it was in the ethersphere. I was like, oh yeah, there's this rabbi who debates Christians, but we heard of him, but we didn't really understand what it was. I went to yeshiva, and to us, it was like, don't bother learning anything regarding the New Testament. Don't bother debating Christians. Just stay in your lane and learn. I got older and I started thinking for myself. I made my own path a little bit, and I started doing this as well. And that's where you got on the radar again.
Hmm.
So I do appreciate you coming on. If you
Sure.
could tell me, what is your like bringing up upbringing, religious upbringing? Is it like what type of Orthodox? If it was, if you could explain that.
Sure. My father, a blessed memory, was a Rosh Yeshiva. He learned in Lakewood. I learned in the Mir. So I had a very traditional Orthodox upbringing.
And then what made you interested in like talking to Christians, debating Christians or Jewish messianics?
I didn't want to debate anyone. I wanted Jews who had converted to Christianity to return back to the Jewish faith. And I wanted to prevent Jews who had not converted. I wanted to provide them with answers to the pressing questions that Christians raise. Christians are raising important questions, and they're also uh, very directly assaulting the Jewish faith. And I don't mean assaulting in a violent way. Although there are some Christians that have a very unfavorable view of Jews and Judaism, but most, I assume, not, especially in the United States. But there is an assault um, waged by the church against the faith of Israel, and that's 2,000 years old. They're asking pressing questions that deserve meaningful answers. So I do that. And in the course of what I do, opportunities arise to debate Christians. Just had one in Jerusalem, another one earlier in San Antonio this year. So that's all very exciting. I write books on the topic, but it's all for the purpose also of people learning about the Jewish faith, learning Tanakh, the Hebrew scriptures, understanding the fullness of our sacred oracles. So all that is a product of a product of the work that I do.
Now, is converting Jews also on your radar, or that would be just something that would be incidental?
Converting,
I'm
what
sorry,
does that
converting to
mean?
Judaism. Sorry, I meant converting to Judaism. I meant converting others to Judaism.
Right, so that's incidental. But the vast majority of the people affected by me, because I have a large reach, there's millions of people who are watching me, most of them obviously are not Jewish. So the byproduct of what I do is that many evangelical Christians watch me, and then many of them will convert to Judaism or become B'nai Noach. That's very, very common. I don't know if it's most, but a considerable number of the people who convert to Judaism are former Christians, former conservative Christians, and many of them, watch my videos on YouTube or read my books and so on, and that's part of their journey. That was not my intent, but I welcome them home.
And when you say they become a B'nai Noach, is that a conversion process? What does that entail?
Yeah, so B'nai Noach, because I should explain what that means, but becoming a Ben Noach really means, because that's an anachronism, and most people watching us now are not going to understand what that means. It means that somebody who is not Jewish embraces the Jewish faith, but does not join the Jewish nation. We're a people, we're a nation, we're the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We're an ancient people with a covenant. Then we have a faith. And there are some people who feel compelled by the faith of Israel, and Judaism is their religious faith, but they don't, at this time, don't feel compelled to join the Jewish nation. So those people are called B'nai Noach in our literature, and it really is the oldest religion in the world. And they have, often we speak of them having seven Noahide laws, but there are really about 100 commandments that apply to them in that fall into seven categories of laws. So we call the seven Noahide laws. But what they're doing is they're adopting the Jewish faith, but not the Jewish nation. That does not require any ceremony in any way. Uh, I mean, there's an exception if someone moves to Israel and becomes a ger toshev. I don't want to make it complicated, but
Yeah.
that's just their personal relationship with God. That means they're accepting the God of Israel as their only Lord and Savior in their lives.
Now, how did this fall on your radar? So you went to yeshiva, um, like thousands of others do, but how did this this area drive you? Or
I, I think, like everyone, I think you see Jews for Jesus as an example. That's the largest Christian mission to the Jews. This is a Baptist mission targeting Jews for conversion. And I was appalled. I was shocked that the Christians are openly trying to convert us. And worse, they're misappropriating Jewish symbols, icons, and liturgy, meaning they would tell you that if you become a believer in Jesus, you're not converting to another religion. Rather, you're becoming a Messianic Jew, a complete Jew. It's the most Jewish thing you can do. And then they misappropriate Jewish liturgy. They have churches that are designed to appear as though they're synagogues. I'm not kidding. It means they don't have a cross or any of the things you would expect to see in a typical church. But they look like a regular synagogue, a regular shul. And they use many Jewish traditions and prayer services, but they interpolate into them a Christian message. So they will light Sabbath candles in a Messianic congregation on Friday evening, but they're blessed that Jesus world. So they take a Passover Seder and they say the wine represents the blood of Jesus, the matzah, the body of Jesus, and the three matzah represent the Trinity. So what they're doing is they're completely misappropriating the Jewish faith because they feel that if they present Christianity with a Jewish, superficial Jewish customs and traditions, that this would be more attractive to
palatable?
Jews. Yeah, more palatable Jews. And why I did this is why I think anyone would do this. I mean, obviously, there are millions of Jewish people that see this very aggressive effort to convert Jews to Christianity. So I decided that I definitely want to stop that and protect Jews from getting involved. And I want my Jews back. The Jews who are in the church, I want them home. This is
And how
very
did
no-brainer.
and how did you go about doing that? As far as yeshiva is Talmudic heavy study. So how did you go about educating yourself to do this mission or to do
Yes,
this teaching?
well, when I started doing this a long time ago, so there was no one really to learn from. So you had to, look at their arguments, take them very, very seriously, um, study it, study Tanakh. I mean, without understanding the Hebrew Bible, you can't talk to a missionary. You have to understand what is it that they believe, why do they believe it, and why do people want to believe this stuff. So it's extremely important to understand if you're going to do this, just like a doctor or someone who seeks to be a physician in medical school has to study disease. You can't just study healthy people, but you have to study people who are not well. So you have to study Christian literature and Christian theology in order so that you can understand what it is they believe and in a sound, sober way, help them understand why the God of Israel, or the prophets of Israel, utterly oppose these teachings. So, of course, you have to study that.
And how did you go about starting? There was no social media back then. So how do you go ahead and reach out and start doing this?
Well, yeah, so there was no, you're right. So when I started doing this, there was no internet, didn't exist. I started doing it, I don't know whatever, more than 40 years ago. There was no such thing as the internet. So it was helpful. So I would meet with these Jews who are in the church and subsequently met with Christians. I would lecture on the topic and engage with more Christians. And because there was no internet, there was no such thing as a cell phone. So I got to sit with these people and listen to what they were saying and understand what they believe, and then be able to respond to them in a coherent, thoughtful way And that gave me an advantage over anyone today who's trying to do this. Because I had to actually speak to Christians, there was no like you have the barrier of email or internet, which is like, not personal. You don't really get to listen to them. I had the opportunity to listen carefully to them and answer them thoughtfully, personally, and that then I was able to marshal a body of responses to their questions. I say some of the questions are outrageous, but some of them are very, very thoughtful. Regardless, they're on their minds, and a response had to be created. So I devoted my entire life to this. This is all I do.
And how did, like, the first debate, how did that get arranged and where was it?
Who remembers?
Yeah.
What you do is uh, you just we're going back a long time. So what you do is you're on a stage with someone else. How that means is so let's say there's a church whose pastor wanted to debate me or a whatever. So it's set up like I just did one here in Jerusalem. There was a pastor in Australia who wanted to debate me. It doesn't matter. I mean, there's Christian ministers who it's not that easy today for me to get people. There's a lot of Christians out there who are just angry, but someone with real serious credentials, that wasn't easy to get, but that became very important to me.
Right. No, I just asked that question because I figured these days is more of a people look at it more as like entertainment to see, oh, a rabbi debate with someone who's Christian. So I think there's more opportunity for it. I think when you started this, you were starting it. There was I don't think there was anyone else doing it.
There's some people, but not debating. No, that was something unique. But it's very important. See, it's like this. If I'm doing a show, typical show, so there's no Christian on here with me. So I think many Christians might feel, or many Jews may feel, well, what do the Christians have to say? But in the context of a debate, people can then hear both sides and realize that I'm not strawmanning when I'm lecturing and putting out videos, and I put out a lot of videos on YouTube. I'm steel manning the Christian position and responding to it accordingly. So, you know, so I think I don't get to do that a lot because, it's just not easy to set up. It requires a lot of, auditoriums and whatever it takes. It's not easy to set up, but it is a valuable thing. It's not something I do every day. I probably only do a few debates a year. But I think it helps people. People do enjoy the engagement. I think that's something very unique.
Now, when you debate, do you try to answer all of their points, or do you sort of stick to your message throughout the debate?
Oh, actually, I only do the former. That means what I do when I go to a debate is I have no script at all. I have no idea what's going to happen. So all I do is I respond to the points they make. It's very easy for me to play my role because all I do is they always go set first because the proposition is that Jesus is the promised Jewish Messiah. That's always the proposition. So they go first and explain to the audience and me why I should believe in this stuff, why I should believe that Jesus is the Messiah. So I have no notes. And then whatever they say is going to shape my response, and I'm going to address the most salient features of their arguments. Yeah.
Now, Messianic Jews have a little bit of a different point of view. I'm talking about those that are actually Jewish, ethnically, not those who call themselves Messianic Jews. And they claim that they could believe in Jesus as the Messiah, but not as God, and it's not contrary to the Torah. Do you find that a tenable position for someone to be, to practice Judaism, like Judaism?
Okay, let me just lay this out. So there's no such thing as Messianic Jews or Judaism. Now, I know there are people who self-identify that way, but it's not real. It's a method. These are all Protestant Christians. Now, just like, but they use Jewish symbols and icons and traditions, but theologically, there's no difference in what they believe and what a Christian Zionist would believe, as an example. Now, let's say I'm making up this number. 95% of Protestants believe in the doctrine of the Trinity in different versions of it, but some form of that. So 95% of the so-called Messianics is a Protestant movement that uses Jewish symbols and icons, but fundamentally, there's no difference in a Messianic beliefs and what an evangelical Christian believes. They believe the same thing. There are, therefore, because there are uh, Protestants that do not believe in the Trinity, they're called Unitarians, as an example. There are other groups like Christadelphians. There are they're a minority. So I made up the number 95% of Protestants believe in Trinity. I don't actually know that, but it's something along those lines. So almost all Messianics, people who identify as Messianic, and most of them are not Jewish, by the way. If you went to a Messianic congregation, in almost all cases, the vast majority of the people who are there are not Jewish. The majority of Jews who convert to Christianity are in churches, not Messianic congregations. So there are Unitarian Christians, and therefore there are Unitarian Messianics. But often, I just want to caution you, very often people will say, I don't believe in the Trinity, but they're playing with words, and it really is not substantive. You would have to press further and ask, do you believe that Jesus was God incarnate? Do you think that Jesus was eternal or created? So those would be, because many of them don't like the word Trinity because it doesn't sound Jewish, it sounds Christian. I know it sounds ridiculous. So they are just saying, I believe that, that God incarnated into a man, came in the form of a man. I don't believe in the Trinity. But then they're actually selling modalism, which is a heresy of Christianity. Most Messianics do not even understand the doctrine of the Trinity or what they're proposing. But as I said, I know Messianics who are Unitarians. That means they totally reject the Trinity. They do not believe that Jesus was God. Do I have any objection to it? Of course, it's a nightmare because the Christian Bible teaches vicarious atonement, that the innocent could die as a ransom for the sins of the wicked. The Tanakh says that is opposed by the God of Israel, Ezekiel 18 as an example. The innocent cannot die for the sins of the wicked. And that, in the same way in our criminal justice system, here in America, you don't want to think that there are any innocent people languishing in a prison. You want the guilty incarcerated and the innocent exonerated. Well, certainly God's judicial system, his sensitivities are at least as strong as ours. So they believe vicarious atonement. That's in the Christian Bible. That's in Matthew, Mark, and John. It's not. Luke doesn't believe in that. They believe that now it's very critical that you don't have to keep the commandments in the Torah. Now, there are messianics who do keep ritual commandments. Usually they're doing it superficially. But there are some here in Israel, there are some in the United States, there are not many. This is an outlier, but there are some people who, certainly would not eat pork or something like that, or they would, keep Shabbat. And there are some that actually do keep it. I know some that might, it's very rare they actually do it. They usually do it in a very superficial way. They're not really doing it, but it's possible they went. But here's the key. The Christian Bible very clearly states that you don't have to keep the ritual commandments. The Christian Bible, and I should say, really, this is found in the letters of Paul and the book of Hebrews, that the ritual commandments are just a shadow, and the essence is Christ, Colossians 2:16 and 17. The Christ is the end of the law. It's everyone who believes, Romans chapter 10. So the Christian Bible is very clear in saying that no one has to keep the law, and the law can't save you, and a person is only saved by believing that Jesus died for your sins and rose on the third day. Now, there are some Christians who are pronomian, which means that they think that you should keep the commandments. There are such Christians. They're, again, very, very small number. They do exist, but they still don't believe that a person is saved by keeping Shabbos or saved by keeping kosher, but you're only saved by believing in Jesus. But some may say that, look, these are eternal commandments and the person should keep, but your salvation is not connected to that. Conversely, in the Torah, we're told explicitly, all over the place, that God wants two things from us in a relationship with God, in a proper covenantal relationship. Number one is to have a personal relationship with God, to love the Lord your God, and to serve him. And two is to be loyal to his Torah, to his mitzvah. That's clear all over Tanakh. So what Christians are saying is you don't have to keep the mitzvot of the Torah, and they call it the works of the law. So it really sounds very unattractive, and therefore you don't have to keep it. So therefore, being a Unitarian Christian, well, does eliminate one problem. So okay, you're not smoking, but you're still drinking excessively. You're still doing enormous spiritual damage to yourself. It's not a good idea.
Now, Christian, I'm going to get into some substantive things. I watch a lot of your stuff, and I don't want to repeat. I want to talk about certain things I haven't seen. If you could go through them. So Christians claim, first of all, that it was God that ate with Abraham in Genesis 18. So I just wanted to know what your take on that was.
We're told explicitly that they're angels, and in when two of the angels leave, one remains behind. One's job was to reveal to Abraham that he's going next year he'd have a child. Two of them leave. We're told explicitly in the text, and I encourage, just so people understand, Genesis 18:19 is one long story of God visiting Abraham, recovering from circumcision. Then he sees three angels who he thinks are travelers. You all know the story. So we're told explicitly that they're malachim. I mean, it's explicitly in the Torah. So now this is what Christians do. They use what's called a typology. They say that when you see the angel of the Lord, it really means Jesus. So it's not supported by the text, and angels are not God. And we're told explicitly in the Tanakh that angels are only doing the will of God, that they are messengers of God. In fact, that's what the word literally means. And what I want to do with you is just explain why they need to do it. Why are they forced to say that when Joshua in chapter 5 encounters an angel of the Lord, a captain of God's army, that they say that's Jesus? Why? Well, the reason is because there's no text in Tanakh that says God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son so that anyone who would believe in him would not perish but have everlasting life. That means the fact that they have to make up this stuff and just put Jesus in there, even though he's not there, like Joseph was rejected by his brothers, right, in Genesis. So that's a type of Jesus. Well, why do they have to come on to this kind of stuff? Well, they have to because their original claim is completely fatuous. You follow? It means Christians will say to you, you must have heard this, that there are 365 prophecies in the Old Testament that all speak about Jesus, right? You must have heard this. That
Yes,
it
and he
proves,
fulfills
right?
300 of them.
Right. So I want to just be very clear that I'm steel manning this. You and I are not going to be making up stuff. Okay. So what happens is this is a bait and switch. It's just simply three-card Monte. So this is what's going on. Christians present their case as though it's ironclad. They will say to you, there are hundreds of prophecies in the Old Testament that clearly speak about Jesus. Now, what we do is say, okay, that's a fantastic claim. Let's explore these prophecies, these putative claims. And then we look them up and we find they're all scandalous. None of them, it doesn't say a virgin. All this stuff isn't there. So then what we do, it's just a bait and switch. And then they say, okay, it's not there, but, Joseph is really a type of Christ. And the angel Lord is really Christ. But it doesn't say that. So what they're doing is they first are selling you on the idea that Jesus explicitly in the Hebrew Bible. And then when it's not there, of course, it's never there. And not only is it not there, but all these verses and passages are all completely scandalous. So then they go, oh, Abraham ate with Jesus, but it doesn't say that. Well, we believe that. And then what happens when you press hard enough? This is what happens, will always happen. And then it changed. Well, Jesus changed my life. When I accepted Yeshua in my life, you must have heard this 1,000 times. I used to be a drug addict. I used to smoke. I did whatever it is. And Jesus spoke to me. He laid it on my heart. And I'm going to pray for you. You must have heard this 1,000 times. So
I
what
have
happened?
heard it.
Okay, so I just want to be clear for viewers who are not exposed to this. This is what always happens is it's a game of hide the ball. You're presented with a fantastic claim that Jesus is explicitly in the Bible, and then he's not in the Bible. And then it's a typology where these stories where there's no Jesus there all come, and it's not there. That's not what you claimed. That's not what he sold. And then when that doesn't work, is well, Jesus will save my life. Do you want to go to hell? Are you perfect? Are you a sinner? And look, I was a sinner and changed my life. Well, every religion has followers that believe that their religion changed their life and they believe they're going to heaven, whether they're Muslim, Christian, Catholic, Protestant, doesn't matter. They all believe that because of their religion, they're saved, and Jesus or whoever their prophet that speaks to them personally, change their lives, transform their lives, and they quit drinking and drink. So then it becomes this subjective personal experience. So what's happening is they're just changing, they're moving the target around. They're not really hitting a bullseye as they claim. They're simply throwing a dart into a wall and they're painting a target around it. That's really what's happening.
Now, what about when they do this? They say there's a dichotomy of God. They say in Genesis 1:26, "Let us make man." When it says in Genesis 19:24 that Hashem threw the gophers from Hashem, sort of indicating there are two Hashems.
Yeah, so those are two very different passages. Genesis 1:26, we find out that man is in fact binary. We're going to see that in the next chapter in Genesis 2, verse 7. That means what is God? So God says when he creates man, "Na'aseh odem b'tzalmenu," let us create man in our image. But it doesn't identify who it is. I mean, so God is somehow interacting with something else to create man. And incidentally, that's the last of God's creation. Like it doesn't say, let us make fish, let us make light. It's only let us make man. Why man? Well, we find out in chapter 2 that God collects clay of the earth, shapes it in the form of man, and breathes into his nostrils. And it becomes Adam, man. So there we see it. So God is summoning the physical world. He's blowing his whatever this means, but he's the ruach of God is entering into this what would otherwise be an animal. We're all made of stardust after all. So that's what the text means. So it's not there. And then you raise Genesis chapter 19. Well, there's an asnachta there, which means that sulfur came down, fire came down from the sky, and it comes from God. Now, why is it written that way? So there is an unambiguous semicolon there. Now, granted, all grammar is Masoretic, which means it's from the medieval period. But if you read it, there is a stop there. This came from God. Why is it emphasized? This is very critical. They're asking a good question there. The reason why it's double emphasized, the fire that came from heaven that destroyed Sodom is from God, is because if you look earlier in Genesis 19, excuse me, you will see that the angels say that we are going to destroy Sodom, and therefore we have to rescue them. And when Lot repeats this to his sons-in-law, he says they're going to destroy Sodom. When Lot is too tired and says, I can't, in Genesis 19, and he says to the angels, look, I just can't go anymore. There are caves here in Sohar. Can we stay there overnight? Could you not destroy the city? So in the text, because the angels are purported to be destroying Sodom, the text will later on, and quite correctly, will emphasize you should know at the end of the day, these are angels, and the fire is directly from God. But they're playing a game because the Tanakh is repeating and emphasizing that this is really all from God, and they're ignoring the semicolon that's unambiguous. That's why it's there.
Now we have, it says, um, we have the situation where Jacob, he wrestled with an angel, right? This is in Genesis 32. He wrestled with an angel.
Correct.
And he calls his name because it says, yes, he wrestled with an angel. So we see, but we also see there, it says that a couple verses later, it says that Jacob, he called the place Peniel, because he said he saw the face of Hashem. And in Exodus 33:11, it says that Moses I said Moses also he spoke face to face. Didn't say he saw the face of God, but he said spoke face to face. But then it also says in 33:20, as we know, you can't see the face of God and live. So how do we fit these all together?
Sure, all easy. So let me ask you a question. You suggested that in Genesis 32, it's true that Jacob is wrestling, but what does it say he wrestled with an angel? In fact, if you look at if you just looked, you're right. You're correct. In fact, Rashi says that Jacob's wrestling with an angel is actually an angel of Asa, but it's not in the text. And you're quite right. If you looked at Genesis 32 alone and had no other, I mean, you had to believe that Jacob's wrestling God created the heaven and earth. That doesn't really make sense. Let's just say, I want to just steel man this. I want to make this as hard as possible. Okay, I'll concede it all. So the question is, but it's an angel. But how do you know it? It's actually in the text, but it's not there. Where is an angel? An angel you'll find in Hosea chapter 12, verse 4. So when you went to yeshiva, you told me at the outset of this interview, you learned that Jacob was wrestling with an angel. That you don't need Rashi for that. It's in Tanakh
It's
that
in
he
Hosea.
wrestled with it. Yeah, it's in Hosea openly. I mean, he wrestled with it. Now, there is something that we got to get clear, and I say this, I especially want to talk to the Christians here. You're very vulnerable. Why are you vulnerable? Because when you went to school, you weren't taught Hebrew. You weren't. So you're totally vulnerable to English translations too. There's a convention in Tanakh. It's it's not inconvenient. You went to yeshiva, you would know this, that angels are called God in Tanakh, prophets are called God, judges are called God in Exodus 21 and 22. It's all over the Moses called God. Could be very inconvenient. An angel is called, I mean, all over the place. Should be very, very careful with this. In Judges chapter 13, when Manoah, the father of Shimshon, of Samson, when his wife encounters an angel and then he finds out about it, and then he finally sees the angel go up in flames up to the sky and then realizes it was an angel, he says, we saw God. Now it clearly says it was an angel, it was not God, right? So people have a numinous, powerful encounter with an angel, Lord, and people are become frightened, said, I encountered the divine. Okay, so be very careful. Angels are called God in Tanakh. And if you don't read the context, you are in so much trouble. You are baked, you're fried. Now, what happens is people come to Tanakh as though I don't know what I don't because they're religious. That means they believe in God. They believe Tanakh is the word of God. But for some reason, although they read Harry Potter from beginning to end, they don't read Tanakh from beginning to end, not once in their lives. And therefore, if you read Tanakh, you know this is what I'm telling you is very rudimentary. Judges chapter 2, verse 1 and 2, an angel of the Lord says, I took you out of Egypt. This is all over Tanakh. Now, Christians weaponize this. They marshal this convention, which is unconventional. Us. We don't talk this way. You and I talk. We talk. An angel is very distinct from God, as it should be. But in Tanakh, if you represent God, you are called God in Tanakh. Christians then weaponize this in order to sell you the doctrine of the Trinity. That's what's going on all over the place. Okay, so So that's how people get into trouble. Now let's go to our other text in the book of Exodus where it says that Moses spoke to God face to face, but you didn't finish the rest of it, as a man speaks to his friend, which means that unlike other prophets who had to go into a dream state, who had to go into a unconscious state in order to receive prophecy, Moshe Rabbeinu, olav shalom, when he received prophecy, he was a completely conscious state. And in fact, we find in the Torah explicitly, Moses asked God, "Can I see your face?" And God said, "No one can see my face and live. I'll show you my back." I'm not going to go into what that means now because that's not germane. So it's very clear in the Torah that whatever it means to see God's face, Moses never did. In the text where it says that Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher of blessed memory, spoke to God face to face, there's a modifier at the end of the pasuk in the verse, as a man speaks to his friend, which means that when God spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu, God spoke and Moses heard him in a completely conscious state. Conversely, as an example, when Shmuel Hanovi, when Samuel the prophet, right in the beginning of the book of Samuel, when he is sleeping and he hears someone calling him and he goes, runs to Eli, says, "Did you call me? What's going on?" Eli realizes what's going on. He says, "Go back to sleep." And he receives prophecy. So prophecy was normally received in an unconscious state. Moshe Rabbeinu, however, was able to encounter and speak to God as a man speaks to his friend. So if you don't modify that, of course you're going to wind up in the Trinity, and people will be very susceptible to that kind of theological sophistry.
They like to point out. I was going to say they like to point out that we give physical features to God, like at Sinai, the people approached and looked up and they saw the feet of God and the sapphires underneath.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean that is just a way of speaking. Like could they really have seen? They couldn't have seen God's feet.
Well, when Tanakh says that God covered us with his feathers, does that mean God's a chicken? So this is all ridiculous. So
Yeah.
we obviously a bird hovers over its babies with its feathers to protect it. So Tanakh does engage in anthropomorphic language constantly, repeatedly, and again, what we encounter is missionaries are seizing this to be able to say you should convert to Christianity. Look, let me be very clear. Let me rephrase this so this doesn't become a pedantic conversation. Christians are making fantastic claims. It doesn't mean they're not true, but they're fantastic claims. Okay. Fantastic claims require fantastic evidence. That's all. Very, very simple. It doesn't mean it's not possible. There are many things in Tanakh that are fantastic. You just need fantastic evidence. So, if you make a fantastic claim, you better have fantastic evidence. You better not serve up something that is mediocre or sophomoric evidence. And that's what we're being served, is scandalous evidence. So very simple. You want to claim that Jesus is God and he's in Tanakh, that's all I'm saying is that's a fantastic claim that transparently is. And Christians then make the further state that there are, as you said, like we know each other. I want the viewers to know this. You and I never had a conversation in our lives, right? So when I ask you these questions, I've never asked you these questions, and you're confirming to me that Christians said all these things. Christians say repeatedly there are hundreds of clear prophecies in the Old Testament that prove demonstrably that Jesus is the Messiah. And then we're asked, okay, show it to me. And then we're served up this kind of stuff like God's outstretched arm, and well, no, that's not what the promise was. So we do have anthropomorphic language in Tanakh. They admit this as well, where it's convenient for them. But that doesn't mean, as I said, God's not a chicken, and but he is. We do find Tanakh this kind of language that's being used, and then, as we would expect, missionaries are marshaling that. But that's not the promise. The promise is there's proof, clear, unambiguous proof. And then we look at the text, it just isn't there. And moreover, we're told explicitly in Tanakh that the innocent cannot die for the sins of the wicked. And we're told explicitly in the Hebrew Bible that God is not a man. God is v'gam netzach asher lo yishaka ki lo adam hu linochem. For ki lo adam hu, he is not a man linochem. First Samuel chapter 15 verse 29, and many other verses like this. That God is not a man. It's just all over the place. So therefore, you need fantastic claims, and what we encounter instead when we hear these so-called proofs are totally scandalous. They're not just not fantastic, and they're not just not mediocre. They're transparently, completely made up.
Now I just want to turn your attention a little bit later. So Daniel, let's skip all the way to the end almost of Tanakh. So Daniel 9. Daniel 9 is a big one, and they talk about the timeline there, the 70 weeks that he didn't understand how Jeremiah's 70 years, how that played out. So how do you see the verses at the end, like particularly 26 and 27, like who's the anointed one at the end that is talking about, etc.
Right. So, tragically, Christians don't read Daniel 9, verse 1 through 23. They somehow start reading 24 through 27, those last four passages. So they have no clue what the context of what's going on. Number two, there are two anointed ones spoken of. One that comes after 7 weeks, which is, so a week, just so everyone knows, and everyone agrees on this, so just full disclosure, everyone agrees that when you have the term week, it means 7 years. Each day is a year. Why is not important now, but this is for sure. So therefore, there are two anointed ones spoken of here. One who gives the command to build Yerushalayim, and that comes after 7 weeks, which is 49 years, and that's Cyrus, who we're told explicitly in Tanakh is God's anointed one, his Mashiach. It says it openly in Isaiah 45, verse 1. It says in context, he's the one that gives the command to build Jerusalem and to build the temple. Please read Isaiah 44, 28 and 45, 1. Those different chapters, but that break is artificial. So those are two verses that follow each other. And then there's a subsequent anointed one who is cut off and removed, and that's the priesthood that's removed. Now, when you're speaking to a Christian and Daniel 9 is offered up, it's always a good idea to ask. So there are 490 years in view here, right? 70 weeks. That's the whole big thing. 70 weeks, Daniel 9, verse 24. So just ask the following question, if you want it just simple. When do we start counting this 490-year period? That's all you need to do. Now, it's a really great idea to study Daniel 9. It's gorgeous. Daniel, as you said correctly, is standing in the first year of Darius the Mede. This is Daniel 9, verse 1, and he's contemplating prophecies of Jeremiah. If you want to know, he's contemplating two verses, Jeremiah 25, verse 12, and 29, verse 10, which both speak of 70 years and the fall of Babylon. Daniel mistakenly conflates the two as though those two verses are referring to the 770-year period, and they're not. I don't want to make this complicated, but one begins with the subjugation of Jerusalem by the Babylonian Empire, which occurs 19 years prior to the destruction of the first temple, which is called 20 years. And the other one begins at the destruction of the first temple, L'chorvot Yerushalayim. Okay? Daniel does not understand that, and he's very upset because here the Babylonian Empire is destroyed. How do I know that? Because it says, how does Daniel 9 begin? It says in the first year of Darius the Mede. If Darius the Mede is the king, that means the Neo-Babylonian Empire has come to an end, which we saw earlier on in the book of Daniel. And Daniel is upset. What is he worried about? He's worried that the Babylonian Empire was destroyed, but the other prophecy of Jeremiah 29:10, that the Jews will return back to the land of Israel, hasn't been fulfilled. And Daniel is praying and crying. Okay, but I can go into it. I'm not trying to sell books. I charted it all out in volume 1, Let's Get Biblical. The key point is, ask the Christian a simple question. When do I start counting the 490 years? Just ask. That's all. All you got to do. The whole thing, and you will get convoluted answers to this. That's an easy way to show this whole thing is made up. This number counting is not anywhere in the Christian Bible. It's a later invention. It's second uh, century. And number two is that the temple was destroyed in the year 70. According to them, Jesus was executed approximately at 30, which means there's 40 years between the two. That's 5.5 weeks. What happened? So it doesn't even work. So you come with convoluted answers that it and they don't work. But you just ask. So what's really going on here is that in verse 24 and 25, there are two different anointed ones. One is Cyrus, and the other is the high priest or the priesthood. Now, what does that mean, cut off and not for himself? So we need to understand what that means. So just so everyone understands, the word Mashiach is used in Tanakh 39 times. The word Messiah appears in the Hebrew Bible 39 times. You need to know this. However, in none of those times they're referring to the Messiah. It's not referring to the Mashiach. I know it sounds difficult to wrap your head around, but that's a post-biblical term. So priests were anointed, kings were anointed, prophets were anointed. Even Cyrus, not even Jewish, is anointed. Be very careful, because what the Christian Bibles do is only in Daniel 9 do they translate the word Mashiach as the Messiah, and they put a definite article, the Messiah, and can make the M capital. There's no such thing as a capital letter in Hebrew. So you have to understand that Christians, this is why my heart goes out to them, they have no way of figuring, they have no clue what's flying. So the question is, why did you conflate the 7 and 62 weeks? There's one anointed one who's a prince who comes after 7 weeks, okay? And then there's another anointed one that's removed after or cut off after a subsequent 434 years or 62 weeks. Well, who are these? Now, what the Christian Bibles do, 99% of them, is they try to present it as though the Messiah is cut off after 7 and 62 uh, weeks. Well, that's not how you say 69. And you can see in verse 26, Daniel 9, verse 26 says that after the 62 weeks, let's see, after the 69 weeks. So it's just the whole thing's one huge scam. I want you, the viewer, to understand Daniel 9. Do watch my videos. I go through this very carefully. I'm not trying to sell books. I never do. If you want to see a chart of it, I do chart it all out in volume 1 of Let's Get Biblical. But these are the questions asked to the Christian. Moreover, we're told openly that in Daniel 9 that following this, you'll have 6 things will happen, including the termination of sin, a transgression come to an end. Well, that Jesus didn't do that. So if this is talking about the Messiah, well, Jesus failed at all these things. He can't possibly be the Messiah. But you do, if you're not familiar with these texts, you have no clue what it's doing there and what is Daniel's problem, what is he praying for, what does Gabriel tell him. Of course, you'll wind up in a church. You'll no idea what's going on.
Now, I think most of these past 40 years has been dealing with Christians. Does that have anything to do with the new, not new, but I'm saying is anything to do with Muslims? Right now, there's a huge uptick in Muslim Dawah, and there are actually a lot of Jews that are being caught in this trap. Do you deal at all with Muslim arguments?
I'll tell you frankly, is I rarely encounter Jews who convert to Islam. Not that I have never. I'm saying never. It's very unusual. And I'm not saying that there are no Muslims that would, if they encountered a Jew, might not try to convert him to Islam. Dawah, right. That's a term that means it really means to introduce, it means the introduction. But generally speaking, on the broad spectrum, Muslims are not targeting Jews for conversion. I'm not saying it never happens, but it's very, very unusual. There are Muslims who convert to Judaism. I know many of them. But so there's always going to be homogenization, but there isn't like Jews for Muhammad. There isn't this crazy multi-billion-dollar project to try to convert all the Jews to Islam. So it's obvious, incidentally, that the Jews and the Muslims are really not getting along right now. Right now, we're having one of the worst relationships in our history. Not the worst, but one of the worst. So, I mean, that it goes without saying. So right now, Look, generally, of course, these are generalizations, but with all the problems that Jews and Muslims are having now, and it's huge, it's a huge problem we're having. The big problem is not that Jews are converting to Islam. It just isn't. That's not the case. So therefore, I don't address it. Muslims don't are not Trinitarian. They're Unitarian. They hate the doctrine of Trinity. They reject vicarious atonement. So there's no reason for me to be engaging with the Muslims. And in fact, I'm interviewed regularly on Muslim shows.
Yeah, so I saw recently there was Uthman Farouk, and there was also this Orthodox Muslim, Labiano, who both interviewed
Hmm.
you. That was I didn't see the interviews yet. I'm going to. I found them, but I didn't get to see them yet. Those were based on also trying to show how there's no Trinitarianism in the Tanakh.
Yes, well, I do a lot of interviews on Muslim channels, and then I have never in my life ever been, and I've been on a lot of Muslim. I could say with some sense of confidence, there's no rabbi who does more interviews on Muslim channels than I do, and never did any of those Muslims ever try to convert me um, to Islam. Moreover, I maintain a very strong relationship with many, almost every Muslim person out there. They do not try. We're very respectful of each other. We take live call, those are live, live questions, and we just discuss things. But they have a very now. If you go to a Muslim and just start attacking their religion, even though they didn't try to convert you, well, of course you're going to create something that I think is unfortunate, because right now Muslims and Jews are not getting along real well. So why throw gasoline on a fire if they're not trying to convert you? Obviously, if you go attack a Muslim's belief, they're going to defend themselves. But I don't. I'm not here trying to look for a barroom fight, and certainly I don't want to ignite more discord between Jews and Muslims than there is. There is plenty of it to go around. So no, we talk about, we take questions live, but it's very respectful.
Now, I asked not because I'm trying to antagonize any Muslims, and I agree with you. There's no reason to antagonize anybody. I just find personally, I do live streams, and I have open guests. I get a lot of Muslims who come on, and they're heavy with their dawah, and they have a certain way of doing it. But if this is not your area, or you don't find this the same way, then I won't. We don't have to deal with that topic.
I I'm on Muslim channels constantly. I have never had a Muslim ever tell me that I should become a Muslim. It just never. I served as rabbi of the largest Muslim country in the world. I've lectured in many Muslim countries. I should have many, but a few. Okay, no one's ever tried to correct. You just have to be a mensch when you take to a Muslim. Do not do not gratuitously attack their faith. It's just because they worship one God. Okay, they don't believe any of their prophets are worthy of worship. In fact, they can't stand it. They don't even want to make a picture of it. So why be disrespectful to people who are not trying to convert you? There's plenty of problems going on between Muslims and Jews. Why accelerate the problems, and who's going to pay the price for it? Let's say you have Muslims watching it, right, and they see this conflict between a Jew and a Muslim over what, why, and that could ignite, and who's going to pay the price for it? Somebody else's kid. Like, why do that right now? I, I love Israel. I'm just saying that if someone's not trying to convert you, there's no reason to be disrespectful to their religion. If they're not worshiping idolatry, why would anyone say something to a Muslim that's not just respectful, unless they're asking you a question, then answer the question in a meaningful way. I've never had that issue, and I know all the Muslims you know about. The leaders, almost all of them I know on a personal level. I've they're very respectful towards me, and I am towards them. As I said, never once did any of them. I receive multiple emails a day, multiple messages a day, and calls from Muslims asking me questions to understand Judaism and how to defend their faith, and I always answer in a respectful way.
Okay, I appreciate that. And the last point I had was the Karaites. Do you
Yeah.
have any interaction with them? Is that anything that's real? What is that, if you know?
Yeah, I mean, I there are Karaites who I know who very respectful of me and ask me a lot of questions because Karaites typically, first of all, not many Karaites today. There's not that many. There are some, but most of them are Karaites are people who were religious Jews and just dropped it and decided to become Karaites, so they became online Karaites. I mean, the Karaite synagogue in Jerusalem in the old city operates as a museum today. I'm not saying there aren't any, but the Karaites who I know are very respectful of what I do and are oppose Christianity, oppose missionary work. And as it turns out, there was a book when I started doing this that was an apologetic work against the Christian religion that's called Chizuk Amuna, which means a faith strengthened. And it was written by Isaac Troki centuries ago, who was a Karaite. So there is a very famous apologetic work to defend the Jewish faith from the Christian religion that was done by a Karaite. So now there are people out there who are just very hateful and just hate Torah Shabbat Peh. I don't have time for that. But the Karaites who really are knowledgeable out there, who are just not angry at anyone, they're just raised, whatever it is. I look when I lecture or when I'm on air, I'm not talking about the Talmud. You didn't hear me quote the Talmud at all, right? Right? Did I ever quote the
That's
Talmud
correct.
or Medrash?
No,
I never do.
the
So
text speaks for itself.
Karaite, the text speaks for itself. So any person who calls himself a Karaite who starts in with me is not a good faith actor, because I know a lot of Karaites. I know a lot of them out there who are people who obviously we disagree completely, and I don't know why, or whatever it is. I don't, no point. But the key is they all respect me, and the reason is I quote Tanakh, I quote the Jewish scriptures, and Karaites are fiercely anti-Christian. And as I said, it is one of their boys that wrote centuries ago who wrote a very famous work
Yeah.
called Faith Strengthened. Now, that work today is not that useful because it was written mostly, a lot of it is opposing Roman Catholicism, which really are not, the Protestants are the ones who are evangelizing Jews. But nevertheless, Karaites are fiercely anti-Christian, and those who are serious people who are Karaites, who I do know, are very supportive of what I do.
I thank you so much for coming on and taking the time. I do
Sure,
appreciate it very much. I do
great.
thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All
Shalom.
right. Shalom.